All right. You know how we start the second half of the day? I haven't had this one. Is it good? It's a lot of mango. Okay. All right. So we are going to talk about the Syrian Civil War today and a little bit tomorrow. This ongoing conflict that's happening in the Middle East that is, at this point, it's almost silly to call it a Syrian Civil War. Civil war is basically the concept of infighting within a singular country, but it has invoked and involved no, you're good, so many other countries as things or as time has gone on that it's almost silly to call it a civil war anymore. It's almost like another Middle Eastern war, basically. We are going on about 10 years of this conflict brewing and happening, and the slaughter that's happening within Syria and the surrounding countries based on these ideals or differences between these two people. So the goals of today are to kind of go over the building blocks of how we get to civil war, how this conflict comes to be, as well as who's involved, all of that fun stuff. Something you don't need to write down, but just something to recognize or something to think about, that these essential questions will be able to be answered by the time that we are done talking about it this week. So you'll be able to answer why the Syrian Civil War is so complicated and involves so many people, and as well, how does the Syrian Civil War play into our discussion of region? So why does it fit in this topic? Okay. All right, so let's go ahead and move on, and we'll start with the base of our triangle, basically. I like to use the idea of a triangle because it's building and building up to a point, which is the Civil War. And it just makes sense that one can't happen without the other, okay? All right, so we're moving back to the beginning of this story. And where it starts, or the whole demeanor of this, starts with the fact that the government that runs Syria is a minority group, okay? And by minority, I don't mean like people of color when we use minority in that sense. I mean like the literal smaller group of people, okay? In Syria, leading up to these outbursts of protests, basically, which we'll get to in just a little bit, Syria had had a variety of different religious and ethnic divides happening across the country that made its way into politics. So this guy right here, he is the president Bashar al-Assad of Syria. He belongs to a religious sect of Islam called Shia, and it is the minority of the country. With him taking power and with that area or with that sect taking power, it caused a lot of problems. When the people of Syria started looking more at religion as a way of persecution, is the way that I'll put it, Bashar al Assad and the government of Syria started getting very fearful of their place and reactive to things that were happening. So, as I said, this guy up here is Bashar al Assad. Okay. He is the president of Syria, and he does run this minority group. He runs this minority sector of Syria, but it's a minority for a reason, meaning he is very well liked between like the military services and security services and like war forces, but not very popular to the broader population. So if I'm somebody who is running a group who is basically threatened by the people around me, and I have the military on my side, violence seems more tempting, or at least it's easier to access. Like I said, we're building the building block at the very bottom of this triangle right now, and this is where it's heading. Okay? So Bashar al Assad has strong support in the military, but not a whole lot else. Okay? This fear and this reactive nature, the violence or the tempting of violence throughout the country is driven by something called a diaspora. A diaspora is a large movement out of one area by a large group of people. And in this case, it's a large majority of the population moving from cities to rural areas to gain fresh water, basically. There was a water shortage. It's happening all across the Middle East and in Africa. We'll talk more about it when we talk about human environment interaction. But there's not enough water to go around, so they are going to move out to places where they can have better access to fresh water. Okay? However, that lack of control is going to kind of make Bashar al-Assad and the rest of his regime very uneasy. Okay? So if we're looking at our building blocks, the bottom block of this triangle is that the leaders of Syria are a minority group. They're very fearful and they're very reactive towards those who oppose them. People leaving the area is a problem with control. Okay? It'll all start coming together. I know that this was kind of like a mouthful, basically. A little hard to digest off the rip, but I promise we'll work through it together. Yeah, that's way too much mango. It's disappointing. That means I have to chug it. All right, so the next building block, or where we are going after this. So this is the current state of Syria. The bottom block is the current state of Syria that this is happening, okay? As we are moving forward, we move into something called the Arab Spring, right? In December of 2010, an event happens in Tunisia, which is a country like Northwest Africa, okay? Tunisia was having lots of problems with their government and their regime that was presiding over the Tunisian people. So in retaliation or as a response mechanism, a Tunisian man, a Tunisian citizen, set himself on fire in front of a government building. Okay? Basically as a protest to the injustice done to him by the government and a variety of different things. Basically, he was trying to say that he would rather like die by the stake than be under this government any longer. Huge motive, very, very powerful statement, okay? Within days after this event happening, protests started popping up all over the country of Tunisia. And the Tunisian president ends up fleeing, basically stepping down, saying, peace out, I don't want to deal with this anymore, okay? So in retrospect, Tunisia got what they wanted. They were upset by the government. The person in charge was oppressive. The person left. So if I'm another country in this immediate area who's looking at this and going, man, that seemed to work really well. Why can't we do that? Okay. So this event and these protests that are happening in Tunisia sets off a momentum or sets off a wildfire of uprisings throughout the Middle East in early 2011 through the summer of 2011, known as the Arab Spring. Like I said, these uprisings are happening because there are multiple countries that are unhappy with their oppressive regimes, and they are calling for more democratic institutions. So, excuse me, more government run by the people, more fair elections, more of a better process, basically. And a lot of the places that this is going to happen is in places like Libya, Egypt, Yemen, which are all kind of in North Africa, Iraq, which is the center of the Middle East, and in Syria. See how we're moving from block to block? That we are unhappy with what's happening. We are protesting, and we're just going to keep going up, okay? So a man kind of making a protest or making a statement towards their oppressive government in 2010 is going to lead to an all-out protesting war in the Middle East. So December of 2010, I was in 7th grade. Yes, 7th grade, something like that. Okay. And I remember watching this like live. Like we found the video, or like CNN had posted the video before they decided it was not okay to show somebody on fire. And it was something. I remember watching it with my friends and being like, what the hell is happening in the Middle East? I'm sure we found it semi-funny because, you know, you make stupid decisions when you're a teenager, but it's going to spark something much bigger. I don't like it. I gotta stop drinking it. All right, so the Arab Spring, it doesn't just stop with protests, okay? If it stopped with protests, we'd have nothing to talk about, right? So the Arab Spring starts popping up all over these different countries. Protests start coming in and out in these major cities, calling for the removal of these oppressive presidents or these oppressive regimes. Can't speak today. Okay? During one of these Arab Spring demonstrations in Syria, okay, so it looked basically something like this: that the people are demanding the removal of Assad or Bashar al-Assad from the head of government, as well as any of his like kind of goons that he has underneath him. Okay. During one of these protests, one of these peaceful protests, I might add. Okay. Bashar al-Assad had the government, or excuse me, had the military and his security services open fire on peaceful protesters. These people did not have weapons. These people were not attacking the military forces. They weren't even attacking Bashar al-Assad. They were staying very far away from where he was actually at. But Bashar al-Assad basically had had enough, and they opened fire on these protesters, which is a big no-no. About five to 10 people end up, I can't remember the exact number, 5 to 10 people end up dying because of this open fire, as well as many, many more being like injured or hospitalized. And this triggers a nationwide demand throughout the country of Syria for Assad to resign. But as we can kind of see from our building blocks, right, that he is tempted with violence, that he has the military on his side, et cetera, that he is not going to choose to apologize. He's not going to choose to resign. He's not going to choose to do any of that. He responds with more violence. He basically initiates martial law throughout the country of Syria. He sends troops into small cities and townships to try and find any people who were opposing him or trying to get him to step down. There was a international or a national lockdown on Damascus, which is the capital city. It was just bad all around, okay? Eventually, the opposition, the people who did not like Bashar al-Assad, the people who wanted him to resign, end up taking up arms for themselves. So arming themselves, kind of forming a militia to not only defend themselves against these martial law security services that are around the nation, but also to expel those security forces from their local area. So we're defending ourselves from these people as well as getting them out of these places. Okay? So the opposers, or the people who opposed the Assad regime, did not step down. They went full force into it and said, what can we do to fight back with this? And by doing that, they've basically become a rebel group. Okay? So again, we see those building blocks kind of coming from each other, right? That Bashar al-Assad is in a minority group and is threatened by the thought of removal. We have the Arab Spring popping up around all of the Middle East, and North Africa. That leads people to protesting. Peaceful protesters are shot, leading to a nationwide demand of removal. When it's not met, people start rebelling, and we just keep going up. I promise we'll get to the tip in just a second. This is a good example, or kind of a perfect example, of how we can track how these things happen. All right, so how does it move to civil war then? How do we get to the tip of that triangle? Because there's, a whole different story from protesting to civil war, okay? When these oppositionists start taking up arms against the government, the violence escalates and the country descends into civil war. When these oppositionists start kind of gathering and forming these rebel brigades, they are referred to henceforth as the Syrian rebels. They went out and battled government forces for control of cities, towns, and the countryside, basically trying to fight back against that martial law. By 2012, like early 2012, the fighting had officially reached the capital of Damascus, as well as another larger city named Aleppo. Those are the two main cities where most of the fighting is going to happen within the civil war. Not only because of its size and the population, but also because they are strongholds for the rest of the country. So by the time that we get to Damascus and Aleppo, we are at full-fledged civil war. That we are fighting for the capital, or I should say the rebels and Bashar al-Assad are fighting for the capital to keep control of the country. Okay. As we are moving forward with this, I'm kind of setting this up for something, but in 2012 is when they finally reached Damascus and Aleppo. By June of 2013, about a year later, the UN counts 90,000 people have been killed by the conflict. But by September of 2016, just 3 years later, more than 400,000 had been killed. That is a major ramp up in 3 years, basically. Most of which are civilians, unfortunately. Like I said, I'm kind of ramping this up to something basically with the fact that these 400,000 that have been killed in this growing number that continues to grow even until today, because 2016 was 5 years ago, okay? As this number keeps ramping up and as this number gets further and further, did I just scare you by saying 2016 was 5 years ago? I know, right? In my head, I was thinking the same thing. So when it starts ramping up, or as it continues to ramp up, over 400,000, over 500,000, over 600,000, it just seems impossible. Like there's not even that many people in Syria. Okay, so what is happening? It's because this conflict, by 2016, even before then, is more than just a battle between those who oppose Assad and those who are for Assad. There are many, many different branches and many, many different alliances and enemies that are thrown into the mix as time goes on. There are religious undertones that put Shia, which is the group of Assad, against Sunni, which is the group of the rebels, basically. So it becomes a religious issue, among other things, which we'll kind of go over in just a second. It just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So it's not that we're building more blocks, it's that the point is getting sharper, basically. Oh. How are we feeling so far? We're digesting the information all right, at least. Could be broken down a little bit more, obviously. Okay. Please feel free to interrupt for questions. I know it's, foreign place, foreign war. Sometimes we don't get a whole lot of information about it. We're going to break it down just a little bit further, I promise, but all right, so like I've been kind of setting up, this is just going to get more and more complicated as the years go on, especially with these new pieces of, or these new players, these new enemies, these new allies that are going to continue building and building as the years go on, okay? This is a depiction of the different alliances, enemies, fighting strategies, et cetera, that's happening during the Syrian Civil War. All of these groups are involved in some way, shape, or form. They all have different agendas. And I know this looks super scary because it's meant to. It's very dramatic in this one. This is a more palatable way to look at it, okay? The roots of the fighting look more similar to this, okay? Although the other one is like very scary and accurate, this one's a little bit more easy to handle, okay? So if we're looking at this, the blue affects people that are supporting each other. The red affects people that are attacking each other. We've got the main two of the Syrian government as well as the Free Syrian Army, that's the rebel forces, excuse me, that are the main conflict, that are the core of this, okay? But then we have other groups like ISIS and Jabhat, oh my God, I can't say it right, Jabhat Fatah al-Sham, which is another religious sect, and how religion gets kind of put into this. We've got major countries like Turkey, the United States, Iran, and Russia that are going to come and back and fight against these other people. We've got different groups like Hezbollah, the Syrian Democratic Forces, the GCC, which is the Gulf Cooperation Council, also making an appearance for other different reasons, okay? As you can see, ISIS is kind of in the center. Nobody likes ISIS. We'll talk about that in just a second. But we can also break this down even further. So we can go from this, that's really scary and confusing and a lot of colors, to this, a little bit easier to handle, to breaking it down into 4 main conflicts that are happening that involve this, okay? We can break this down into 4 easy bite sizes that makes it a little bit easier to understand what's happening in Syria, okay? The next slide, I really just want you to make sure to have the conflicts and stuff. I've got a little bit of extra information with it, so if it's valuable to you, please write it down. But I just want you to make sure you have the 4 main conflicts. Are we ready? Cool beans. All right, so 4 overlapping conflicts that are happening at the same time. Conflict number 1, obviously the core of this, forces that are loyal to President Bashar al-Assad versus the rebels who oppose him. Easy peasy. We've got that on lock. That's what we've been talking about this whole time. That is the main conflict. That is the start of this civil war. That is what's going to spark everything else. It's the base level. Okay? There are groups within this conflict of people who are loyal to Bashar al-Assad versus people who oppose Bashar al-Assad that will split up over time. But we're just going to focus on the 2 right now. That's conflict number 1. Conflict number 2. There is a large Kurdish ethnic group in Syria. So Kurds, or the Kurdish ethnic group, is a group in Syria that has basically been nomadic for the greater part of 2 centuries. And a lot of them lie within Syria, okay? When the Syrian Civil War starts, they want to try and take back Kurdish land as a part of this fight. So they split off from everyone and are their own group, basically. Syria doesn't like this, so they are fighting against Syria, but also Turkey, because Turkey has a long history with Kurdish ethnic people in general. So that fight's going to keep going, okay? So conflict 1 is the 2 mains, conflict 1 is the 2 main people. Conflict 2 is the Kurdish forces and the Turkish and Syrian government, okay? Conflict number 3, or kind of the 3rd layer on this, is going to be with the Islamic State. This is when we're bringing religion into the group, okay? Or religion into the conversation. The Islamic State, or the state of religious, what's the best word? Religious nationalists is the best way to put it, okay? Who basically form out of the infighting of all of these different people. So in 2014, the Islamic State seized large parts of Syria and Iraq and declared that territory its caliphate, which is kind of like its homeland, its base, et cetera, et cetera. This is ISIS, okay? ISIS stands for Islamic State of Iran or Iraq and Syria, okay? ISIS comes from Al-Qaeda and other different religious sects that are fighting against each other, but ISIS comes from this, okay? ISIS has no allies in this fight, nobody to back them up. They are basically on their own, and is at war with all other actors in this conflict. Everybody else in the circle is fighting ISIS, and ISIS is fighting everybody else in the circle, okay? I'm gonna be honest, they kind of just came in, sat in the middle of Syria, and flipped everybody off. That's basically what happened, okay? They just sat in the middle and went, okay, that's it. Last but not least, the fourth conflict is the crisscrossing foreign interventions, okay? That other large countries or other large allies are coming into the conversation to either help or hurt the people that have started this, so basically the main core, the conflict number one. So, you know, kind of in a long-standing, Iran and Russia help out Bashar al-Assad, as well as Hezbollah, which is a Lebanese militant group. The United States and Saudi Arabia, as well as Turkey and Iraq, help out the rebels, okay? All of these different foreign powers have different agendas, different reasons that they're there, different things that they want to do. I'm going to show you a video that's going to break that down a little bit better. But all of them are basically all about keeping the war going for one way or another, okay? They are ramping up Syria's violence in a variety of different ways that keeps the war going. Basically what that means is nobody is there to stop it. Everyone is just kind of fighting everyone, okay? All right, so layer upon layer of these four conflicts is what gives us that circle, okay? That we start with the core conflict number one, we get a little bit deeper with conflict two, a little bit more with conflict three, and even more with conflict four. That's why I say, or I don't remember if I've said this in this class period yet or not, that it's silly that it's called a civil war, because this is no longer about the people inside that nation. There are so many other actors at play and so many other people that are pushing in forces and providing aid, providing services, that it's not a civil war anymore. It's a Middle Eastern war, basically, okay? All right, so through our conversations today, we have basically scratched the surface of where it comes from. We've built up to civil war. We have started uncovering the layers of all of these actors that are at play, the different conflicts that are happening. I'm going to show you guys a video that's very well done to talk about more why people are there, what they're doing, et cetera, et cetera. That's going to help you scratch the surface even more or dig into it even more. And then we're going to turn over to a group activity to do your own kind of little bit of research, okay? Once you have this down, you can go ahead and put your notes away. You just need a writing utensil for the rest of the period, okay? All right, so the video I am going to show you, it's a little bit dated. It's from 2017, but I think it does the best of explaining. Things change over time, obviously, so some of these things are a little less extreme as they used to be, and some things have vamped up. It just depends on where we're at, okay? But this one does a really good job of explaining, like it says, who is fighting and why, who is there, who likes each other, who doesn't like each other, and what are they doing, okay?
Syria's war is a mess. After 6 years, the conflict is divided between 4 sides, each side with foreign backers, and those foreign backers don't even agree with each other on who they're fighting for and who they're fighting against. And now, Syria's use of chemical weapons has provoked President Donald Trump to directly attack Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. This is a major development because up until now, the US has only been focused on fighting ISIS. To understand the crisscrossing interventions and battle lines in Syria today and how it got this way, it helps to go back to the beginning of the conflict and watch to see how it unfolded. The first shots in the war were fired in March 2011 by Syrian dictator Bashar al-Assad against peaceful Arab Spring demonstrators. In July, the protesters start shooting back, and some Syrian troops even defect from the Syrian army to join them. They call themselves the Free Syrian Army, and the uprising becomes a civil war. Extremists from around the region and the world start traveling to Syria to join the rebels. Now, Assad actually encourages this by releasing jihadist prisoners to tinge the rebellion with extremism and make it harder for foreign backers to support them. In January 2012, Al-Qaeda forms a new branch in Syria, Jabhat al-Nusra. Also around that time, Syrian Kurdish groups who had long sought autonomy take up arms and informally secede from Assad's rule in the north. That summer is when Syria becomes a proxy war. Iran, Assad's most important ally, intervenes on his behalf. And by the end of 2012, Iran is sending daily cargo flights and has hundreds of officers on the ground. At the same time, the oil-rich Arab states in the Persian Gulf begin sending money and weapons to the rebels, mainly to counter Iran's influence. Iran steps up its influence in turn in mid-2012 when Hezbollah, a Lebanese militia backed by Iran, invades to fight along Assad. In turn, the Gulf states respond, Saudi Arabia really stepping up this time to send more money and weapons to the rebels, this time through Jordan, who also opposes Assad. By 2013, the Middle East is divided between mostly Sunni powers generally supporting the rebels and Shias generally supporting Assad. That April, the Obama administration, horrified by Assad's atrocities and the mounting death toll, signs a secret order authorizing the CIA to train and equip Syrian rebels. But the program stalls. At the same time, the US quietly urges Arab Gulf states to stop funding extremists, but their requests basically go ignored. In August, the Assad regime uses chemical weapons against civilians, provoking condemnation.
Men, women, children lying in rows killed by poison gas. It is in the national security interests of the United States to respond to the Assad regime's use of chemical weapons through a targeted military strike.
Russia proposed on Monday that Syria surrender control over its chemical weapons to the international community for its eventual dismantling to avoid a U.S. military strike.
The U.S. ends up backing down, but the whole thing establishes Syria as a great powers dispute, with Russia backing Assad and the U.S. opposing. Just weeks later, the first American CIA training and arms reached Syrian rebels. The U.S. is now a participant. In February 2014, something happens that transforms the war. An Al-Qaeda affiliate based mostly in Iraq breaks away from the group over internal disagreements. The group calls itself the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, or ISIS, and it becomes Al-Qaeda's enemy. ISIS mostly fights not Assad, but other rebels and Kurds, carving out a mini-state it calls its caliphate. That summer, it marches across Iraq, seizing territory, galvanizing the world against it. In September, 1 year after the U.S. almost bombed Assad, it begins bombing ISIS.
Moving ahead with our campaign of airstrikes against these terrorists, and we're prepared to take action against ISIL in Syria as well.
That summer, in July, the Pentagon launches its own program to train Syrian rebels, but will only train those who will fight ISIS, not Assad. The program fizzles, showing that America now opposes ISIS more than Assad, but that there's also no like-minded Syrian proxy forces on the ground in Syria. In August, Turkey starts bombing Kurdish groups in Iraq and in Turkey, even as these Kurdish groups are fighting ISIS in Syria. But Turkey doesn't bomb ISIS. This gets to one of the big problems in this conflict. The US sees ISIS as its main enemy, but the US's allies like Turkey and a lot of Middle Eastern states have other priorities. This makes for a lot of unclear and confusing alliances. The next month, in September, Russia intervenes on behalf of Assad, sending a few dozen military aircraft to a long-held Russian base in the country. Russia says it's there to bomb ISIS, but in fact only ends up bombing anti-Assad rebels, including some backed by the US. The next year, Donald Trump wins the White House, vowing to stay out of Syria and signaling that Assad should be able to stay in power. At the end of 2016, Assad, helped by Russian air power and Iranian-sponsored militias, retakes the Syrian city of Aleppo, knocking the rebels out of their last remaining urban stronghold. Then, in spring 2017, Assad once again uses chemical weapons against his people, killing 85, including 20 children. Back in the US, Trump says his attitude towards Syria and Assad has, quote, changed very much due to the attacks. He vows to respond, and within just a few days, the White House launches dozens of Tomahawk missiles that strike an airbase in Syria. This is the first time the United States has directly attacked the Assad regime. And this adds yet another crisscrossing complication to the already multidimensional civil war. So as it stands now, Syria is in ruins. Even as Assad recaptures land, the rebellion perseveres. And with outside countries fueling each of the groups, it's clear that there's still no end in sight.
All right, so hopefully that video really nicely outlines how the different layers of conflicts come into play here, right? That we start with this, just that small one, and then it just keeps vamping and vamping and vamping, okay? The current state of the Syrian war as of today is still about the same. The only thing that's been kind of changing is the stronghold of Aleppo. Who has it at what point? It's gone back and forth a couple of different times since 2017, but we still have all of these major powers playing into this civil war. We've got rebels that are still fighting and fighting and fighting, trying to stop civilian overtake or civilian targeting, I should say, among other things, okay? All right, so the last thing that we are going to do today is in front of you, or I just passed out in front of you, a sheet of paper, okay? This sheet of paper has either group 1, 2, 3, or 4 on the front of it, so everybody should have got basically a different piece of paper, okay? So you'll have basically 2 people that you need to link up with from that same group. So if you're a 1, find your 1s. If you're a 2, find your 2s. If you're a 3, find your 3. And you'll need your laptop, so go ahead and do that, please. Okay? So if you're a 1, find your 1. If you're a 2, find your 2s. If you're a 3, find your 3s. I think Allie is a 3. Anybody else a 3 over here? 3s. Maybe Bryce? I don't know. No. Casey's a 3? Okay, you can come with Allie and Lauren. Got 4s over here, I got 3s over here, 1s and 2s. Perfect, awesome, good job. All right, so on Google Classroom, oh, I should double check. I don't think it is on Google Classroom. Let me post it real quick. That would help. On Google Classroom, or it will be on Google Classroom, there is going to be a list of sources that's going to help you finish this sheet of paper. I'll show you all my secrets from Google Classroom. Wahaha. Post. All right, cool. Now it's posted on Google Classroom. My apologies, guys. All right, so on Google Classroom, on this little thing, if you click on it, you will get to a sheet that looks like this, or a page that looks like this, okay? On this page, there is a variety of different sources about the Syrian Civil War, about who's involved, the timeline, et cetera, okay? Use these sources to fill out that sheet, basically with your partnership or with your trio, okay? You've got like 10-ish minutes, a little bit more than that, to start on it today. We will have time to do it tomorrow as well. But the goal is as a group to fill out that sheet, and then we're gonna come back together and talk about each part as a whole group. So like group 1 has a really important part, kind of like a first layer, group 2, second layer, et cetera, et cetera. If you have any trouble with these links, please let me know. I think I fixed all of them. I had some trouble with them today earlier. but I think I fixed all of them. If you don't, or if something's not working, just let me know. Otherwise, I will let you work on what you need to work on. So go ahead and start working on your. Okay. It's not that hard. Be a nice human. Nice. Is it because of this? I have that one too.